Will Johnson grew up in a small town called Maplewood, nestled in the countryside of 1960s America. Maplewood was one of those towns where everyone knew each other, and people left their doors unlocked during the day. Red brick houses lined the streets, their front porches decorated with flower pots and wooden rocking chairs. Every morning, you could hear birds chirping as the sun rose, casting a warm, golden light over the tidy lawns and winding roads. Will's house was on the edge of town, small and a bit worn out, with a roof that needed repairs and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. His family didn't have much money, but to Will it didn't matter. His mother often reminded him, "It's not what you have, it's what you do with it that counts." And Will took this advice to heart. Will wasn't the smartest kid in school, nor was he the best at sports. He struggled to remember his times tables, and whenever he tried to throw a baseball, it somehow always ended up in the wrong direction. But what Will lacked in talent, he made up for with kindness. He had a knack for making people smile, and he never hesitated to lend a hand, whether it was helping his mom carry groceries or sweeping leaves off old Mr. Porter's driveway. One sunny afternoon, Will was playing in his front yard, digging up small rocks and pretending they were pirate treasure, when he noticed someone watching him from across the street. It was Emily, the little girl who had just moved in next door with her family. Emily was shy, always clutching a stuffed rabbit named Buttons and hiding behind her mother's legs whenever she saw strangers. Will waved at her, grinning widely, his hands dirty from digging in the soil. "Hey, you want to play?" he called out. Emily hesitated, clutching Buttons a little tighter, but something about Will's open, friendly smile made her step forward. She crossed the street slowly, her eyes wide and curious. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "I'm digging for treasure," Will said, showing her a small, round stone he had just unearthed. "Look, I found a pirate's diamond. Want to help me find more?" Emily's face lit up and she nodded. Together they spent the afternoon searching for treasure in the front yard. They found smooth stones, a few rusty bottle caps, and even a shiny piece of glass, which Will declared to be the rarest gem of all. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the town, Emily looked at Will and smiled for the first time since she'd moved to Maplewood. "Thank you, Will," she whispered, holding the pirate's diamond tightly in her hand. Will shrugged, brushing dirt off his jeans. "It was nothing. You can keep it if you want." Emily's eyes sparkled. She couldn't believe that Will would give her such a valuable treasure. To her, it felt like magic. From that day on, Emily and Will were inseparable. Will would always find little ways to make her smile, like drawing funny faces in the dirt or picking flowers from his mother's garden to make tiny bouquets. The townsfolk often saw them together, running around barefoot or playing with the stray cats near the general store. And soon enough, Emily's family felt at home in Maplewood, thanks to Will's simple kindness. Life in Maplewood was modest, even quiet. But for Will, every day held its own kind of adventure. He didn't need money, or fancy clothes, or awards to feel happy. To him, happiness was about small acts of kindness, the sound of birds singing in the morning, and the warmth of the sun on his face as he helped a friend dig for pirate treasure. And in his own simple, joyful way, he was already changing the world around him, one small kindness at a time. After graduating high school, Will Johnson decided he was ready to see the world, or at least the parts of America he had only heard about in stories. He had no car, no fancy suitcase, and very little money. But he had an old backpack, a pair of sturdy boots, and a heart full of curiosity. He said goodbye to his family and his little town of Maplewood, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. The world beyond Maplewood was vast, and Will was eager to explore it. Will's first ride was with a friendly truck driver named Lou. Lou was a big man with a booming laugh and a collection of stories about life on the road. As they drove down the long, open highway, Lou shared tales of strange diners, beautiful mountain views, and the characters he'd met along the way. "So, what's got you traveling, kid?" Lou asked as they crossed into the next state, passing fields that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Will smiled. I just want to see what's out there, I guess, meet people, learn new things. My mom always says, there's a whole world waiting for you if you're brave enough to go find it. Lou chuckled, nodding approvingly. That's a good mom you've got there. Over the next few weeks, Will made his way across the countryside, hitching rides with truck drivers, farmers, and the occasional family on a road trip. Each ride was a new adventure. One day he found himself helping a farmer named Mrs. Green herd a group of runaway sheep back into their pen, laughing as they zigzagged across a field. The next, he was sitting in the back of an old pickup truck with a group of musicians heading to a folk festival. They played banjos and sang songs, their voices blending with the wind as they cruised down the road. Will's kindness and eagerness to help others made him unforgettable to the people he met. When he stayed at a small-town diner one night, he noticed the waitress struggling to carry a heavy tray of dishes. Without thinking twice, he jumped up to help her, balancing plates and glasses as they both laughed. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, patting him on the shoulder. "Most folks wouldn't lift a finger to help." Will shrugged, smiling. "I just like seeing people happy, I guess." As he traveled farther, Will saw the bustling streets of big cities for the first time. Tall buildings, neon lights, and people rushing everywhere. It was a world away from quiet Maplewood. He marveled at the skyscrapers in Chicago and watched the lights twinkle on the river at night, feeling like he'd stepped into a new universe. But life on the road wasn't always easy. Some nights Will had to sleep under the stars with only his backpack as a pillow. He'd wake up to the morning chill, his stomach growling because he'd run out of food the night before. Still, he never complained. To Will, every sunrise was a gift, and each day brought a new lesson. One rainy evening, Will found himself waiting for a ride on the side of a lonely road when a small car pulled over. Inside was an older woman named Mrs. Harmon, who wore thick glasses and had a warm, motherly smile. She invited Will in, asking where he was headed. "I don't know exactly," Will admitted with a laugh. "Wherever the road takes me, I guess." Mrs. Harmon laughed too. She was a retired teacher and soon began sharing her life story with Will, how she had spent her days teaching children to read, the joy of watching them learn, and the sadness she felt now that her house was so quiet. "Sometimes I wonder if I made any difference," she said softly, her eyes focused on the road ahead. Will looked at her, his face sincere. "I'm sure you did. My teachers back home taught me things I'll carry with me forever, just like you must have for all those kids." The words seemed to lift a weight off Mrs. Harmon's shoulders, and she gave him a gentle smile. "Thank you, Will. I needed to hear that." Will's journey continued, taking him through deserts and forests, small towns and big cities. He met people from all walks of life, mechanics, artists, farmers, and musicians. Some people were friendly, others guarded, but Will treated them all with the same kindness and respect. He listened to their stories, shared simple meals, and even worked odd jobs along the way to earn a few extra dollars. As he moved through the world, Will realized that each person he met carried their own struggles and dreams. He learned to respect each story, each perspective, and to appreciate the beauty in people's differences. The road taught him to be humble, patient, and most of all, grateful. And so, with each passing mile, Will's heart grew bigger, filled with the warmth and wisdom he gathered from everyone he met. He hadn't just seen America, he had connected with it, one person at a time, discovering that sometimes the greatest treasures in life were found in the hearts of others. One quiet evening, Will was wandering down a dirt road near the edge of a small town in Ohio. The sky was turning a soft pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. He hadn't planned to stay long, just passing through, but something caught his eye, a small, rusty trailer parked under an old oak tree, with peeling paint and a broken window. Smoke was curling lazily from a tiny chimney, and Will could make out the silhouette of a man sitting alone on the trailer's worn-out steps. Curious, Will approached slowly. The man glanced up, his face half hidden by shadows. He looked older than he probably was, with unkempt hair, deep lines on his forehead, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 miles. "Hey there," Will said with a gentle smile, waving as he came closer. "Mind if I sit with you?" The man gave a weary nod. "Suit yourself," he mumbled, his voice low and rough. As Will settled onto the step beside him, he noticed the man wore an old army jacket, its colors faded and its patches frayed. The man introduced himself as Jack, a former soldier who had returned from the war but hadn't quite found his way back into the world. For a while, they sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the trees. Will sensed that Jack had been alone for a long time, and he could feel the sadness radiating from him. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's funny, you know," he said, staring off into the distance. "You come back home and it's like nothing feels real anymore. People move on, but the memories, they don't let go." Will listened quietly, giving Jack the space to speak. Jack began to share his story, little by little, of nights spent in the cold, of the sounds that haunted him, of friends lost, and moments of fear and confusion. As he spoke, his voice cracked, but he kept going, as though he hadn't told anyone this in years. "I tried to find work," Jack continued, "but it's hard to keep going when your own mind feels like a battlefield. Some nights I think it'd be easier just to leave it all behind." Will reached over, placing a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. "I don't know what that feels like, Jack," he said softly, "but I know that you're still here. That's gotta mean something, right?" Jack looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of Will's words. Will continued, "I'm just a kid from a small town, but I've met a lot of good people on this road, people who are carrying things we can't always see. And I think sometimes we just need to be reminded that we're not alone. I'm here, Jack, right here." Jack's expression softened, and for the first time, a flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt warmer, more comforting. As the evening faded into night, Will stayed with Jack, sharing stories of his own adventures, his hometown, and all the little moments of kindness he'd experienced on the road. Jack listened, a faint smile growing as Will talked about the friendly truck drivers, the musicians, and the children who had shown him so much. By the time the stars were out, Jack seemed different, lighter somehow. He turned to Will and said, "Maybe I could come with you for a while, just to see what's out there." Will grinned. "I'd be glad to have some company." The next morning, as the sun rose over the small trailer, Will and Jack packed up and set off together. Jack's steps were slow at first, cautious, but as they walked, his shoulders seemed to relax, and his gaze lifted from the ground to the wide, open road ahead. With Will by his side, Jack began to see the world through a new lens, one of hope and kindness. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally finding his way back home. Will and Jack arrived in a town called Brooksville, a seemingly picturesque place with neat houses, blooming gardens, and tree-lined streets. But as they spent a few days there, they began to notice a tension simmering beneath the town's pretty surface. People kept to themselves, rarely mingling outside their immediate neighborhoods. The shops were divided by invisible lines, with different groups going to different places, and children rarely played together in the parks. One afternoon, as they walked through the main square, Will noticed a small group of children hanging around an old basketball court. A few of them were playing on one side, while others just watched, uncertain if they should join in. Will saw how they glanced at each other, wanting to connect but holding back. "Do you see what I see, Jack?" Will asked with a spark in his eye. Jack chuckled, catching on. "Looks like these kids just need a little nudge." The next day, Will and Jack showed up at the basketball court with a ball and a big idea. Will tossed the ball up and yelled, "Who's up for a game?" At first, the kids stared at him, unsure. But Will's friendly smile and Jack's booming laugh soon put them at ease. Slowly, kids from all around started gathering, and soon they were divided into teams, laughing and playing like they'd known each other forever. The game was just the beginning. As the days went by, Will and Jack organized other simple activities, picnics, art projects, and even small talent shows where kids could sing, dance, or tell jokes. These events created a safe space where kids from all backgrounds could come together and just be kids. And the more they interacted, the more their parents began to notice. One Saturday afternoon, Will saw a group of parents gathered at the edge of the park, watching their children laugh and play together. The parents started talking among themselves, hesitantly at first. But slowly their curiosity and pride in seeing their kids connect broke down the walls between them. Mr. Grayson, a middle-aged man who owned the town's hardware store, approached Will one evening. "I don't know how you did it, son," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "These kids haven't played together like this in years. They're not just neighbors now, they're friends." Will shrugged, smiling warmly. "Sometimes people just need a reason to come together. And kids, they're usually the best teachers when it comes to kindness." Encouraged by the changes, Will and Jack decided to organize a town picnic, inviting everyone to come with their families. Jack used his military background to help set up tents and tables, while Will ran from family to family, welcoming them and making sure everyone felt at home. The day of the picnic was sunny, with a gentle breeze blowing through the trees. Families came carrying homemade dishes, blankets, and chairs. For the first time in years, people shared food, laughed together, and played games. Mr. Grayson played his guitar while others joined in singing old folk songs. It was as if Brooksville had come alive, not just as a collection of houses, but as a community bound by warmth and friendship. By the end of the day, people who had once been strangers were sitting together, sharing stories and exchanging numbers. Even as they packed up to leave, the smiles on their faces showed that something in Brooksville had changed. Before they left town, Will and Jack walked through the square one last time. They saw kids playing together, neighbors chatting, and families gathered on front porches. The lines that had once divided Brooksville had faded, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. Jack looked at Will, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "You know, kid, I think you've done more for this town than they'll ever know." Will smiled, his heart full. "I didn't do anything big, Jack. Just gave folks a reason to remember how good it feels to be kind." As they walked away from Brooksville, Will carried with him the knowledge that even the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference. In every place he went, he knew now that he had the power to bring people together, one small step at a time. Years later, Will Johnson returned to Maplewood, his small hometown nestled between fields and forests. The town looked much the same as he remembered: familiar red brick houses, the old general store with its worn sign, and the tree-lined streets that seemed frozen in time. But coming back felt different now. Will had journeyed far and wide, but Maplewood, with its gentle charm and quiet rhythm, was still the place he called home. Will's parents had passed away while he was traveling, leaving him the little house at the edge of town. Standing in front of it now, he felt a pang of sadness mixed with a deep sense of gratitude. The house was simple and old, its roof patched here and there, but it held memories of warm meals, laughter, and the lessons his parents had taught him. The townsfolk hadn't forgotten Will. Word of his kindness and adventures had spread, and he was greeted warmly by familiar faces wherever he went. People had heard of how he'd helped towns rebuild, encouraged strangers to connect, and left behind friendships in places he'd only been a passing visitor. They saw him now as more than the young boy they once knew. He was a part of their town's legacy, someone who brought hope wherever he went. Soon after settling in, Will decided to dedicate his time to helping the community. He noticed that some of the elderly neighbors needed help around their homes, and that the town's children could use a place to gather after school. So he began small projects, fixing broken fences, planting flowers in front yards, and organizing community events just like he had in the towns he'd visited. As the months passed, his efforts blossomed into something bigger than he had imagined. With the help of others, Will transformed an old abandoned building into a community center. It became a place for children to play, for adults to learn new skills, and for the elderly to gather and share stories. People from all over Maplewood volunteered to help, painting walls, setting up bookshelves, and donating furniture. The community center soon became a lively, welcoming space where everyone could feel at home. One day, the mayor held a small ceremony in front of the new community center. He held a plaque in his hands and announced that they would name the center the Will Johnson Center for Community and Kindness, in honor of Will's dedication to bringing people together. Will was touched and humbled, shaking hands and accepting hugs from the townsfolk who had once watched him grow up. He felt deeply grateful, not for the recognition, but for the chance to make a lasting difference in the town he loved. As the sun began to set that evening, Will sat on the porch of his little house, gazing at the peaceful landscape. The warm light of the sunset bathed everything in a soft glow, casting long shadows over the fields and painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He closed his eyes, letting memories of his journey wash over him, the laughter of children, the stories of strangers, the friendships he'd made along the way. He smiled, feeling a sense of quiet fulfillment. His life hadn't been filled with grand achievements or fame, but it had been rich in meaning. He had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness, the simplest gestures, could bring light to the darkest places and warmth to the loneliest hearts. With the sun dipping below the horizon, Will took a deep breath, content and at peace. He had come full circle back to the place where his journey began, but he knew he had brought a piece of every person he'd met back with him. And there, on that quiet evening, Will Johnson sat alone, yet surrounded by a lifetime of love, laughter, and community, watching the world turn softly to night.